All right, Julie, please confirm that you can hear me, by the way, since I've got a little bit of a different audio setup today.
I can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever part of the world you're calling in from. Thanks for joining us today to talk about customer personas and journey maps. My name is Jeff Abels. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in just a couple of minutes. Today's session, by the way, is a much briefer version of a half-day UG Academy workshop that we did. So I'm trying to boil it down into a 1-hour webinar. And I just recently spent an entire week with a client facilitating this kind of process. So it's going to be fast. It's going to be really a high level. But my goal is for you guys to walk away with some high level things you can take away to start building your own personas and journey maps as you get into this process. So let's get started. I want to share with you guys to start with a quick user journey that I went through not too long ago. In my job, I travel a lot for work. And so at the time, this is a few years ago, I was actually staying a lot at Sheraton types of hotels. And I wound up having to go to Nashua, New Hampshire to visit with a client. And there was bad weather, so I wound up getting rerouted through Boston and had to rent a car there and drive the car up to Nashua. It was all good. I got in after midnight, kind of tired. It was a huge parking lot. I kind of trudged through it with my suitcase, got up to the front desk. And the gentleman at the front desk said, "Mr. Abels, I'm so sorry, but we've overbooked. We don't have room for you tonight at the Sheraton. But the good news is we knew you were probably coming, and we've taken care of you. There's a Red Roof Inn we've checked you into right down the road, and if you like to smoke and the smell of pets, you're going to feel right at home there." So it was awesome. And it was okay. I kind of got that hotels sometimes have this happen, especially when weather keeps people from leaving. But about 2 weeks later, I got a card in the mail. It looked like I could tell it was like in an envelope, but it looked like a greeting card sized envelope with handwriting on the front, Mr. Abels and all that. And I'm kind of a customer experience geek, so I was excited about, what did they do? How are they going to treat me after making this mistake? So I opened up the envelope, and you may want to think about, what might have they done inside of that envelope to make the experience better for me? Well, I opened the little card with the Sheraton logo embossed on the front of it, very beautiful and fancy. And inside it says, "Dear Mr. Abels, thank you for your recent stay at Nashua Sheraton. We hope you'll consider coming back some point in the future." So they completely lost this idea that they had dropped the ball. And now they'd kind of poured salt on the open wound, reminding me that not only did you have this bad experience, but we don't even remember that you had this bad experience. So that's part of what this idea of journey mapping is all about. And some of the questions for you to think about that might help you think about your own stories is, how would Sheraton even know about this story, right? How would they even know that this had happened in their systems? My guess is their system that handled the cancellation didn't talk very well to the system that handled the marketing communication that they sent out to me. So they completely had this slip through the cracks. So there might be a technology piece of even knowing that certain stories are happening. It's really all about data and listening to your customer. And then how could they have better accentuated the positives? How might they have eliminated the negatives? And what was the cost of this problem to them? When you think about it, had I actually stayed there and I got this card, I would have said, "That's nice." But, and probably wouldn't have done anything with it. Since I did stay there but had this awful experience, it actually made that negative much bigger than the potential positive would have actually been. And then what is the cost of a solution? How could they fix that problem and ultimately solve it? And there's a lot of ways we could go. I mean, they might look at it and go, look, a reality of our organization is sometimes we have these overbookings, but you know what? They could have instead sent me something saying, "Here's a voucher for a free night at the Nashua Sheraton next time you're in town," or "Here's a bunch of points on your account. We can see that you're a loyal customer and that's probably important to you." Lots of little things they could have done that would have cost a relatively small amount that would have made me think, wow, I hope this happens again because I got a nice benefit out of it. So these kinds of stories are happening in our businesses all the time, and that's what we're going to kind of identify. Some are good, some aren't so good. So I'm actually going to do a quick poll of the audience. I'm kind of curious. I've talked at a lot of these events, at a lot of these webinars before, and a lot of the live events. So Julie, I'm going to ask you to pull up the first poll because I want to find out. I've done this introduction slide so many times. I want to find out, has everyone heard me before, and are you getting sick of seeing this slide, or am I getting a pretty new audience every time? So Julie, if you could pull up the first poll and share the results, just let me know, have you heard me talk before?
It's running. So let's give folks a minute to answer. Easy question, folks. Come on, just mark it.
I've got a few more after it. I know you tend to multitask, so if you don't mind just checking in real quick and answering the poll, that would help me out.
Absolutely. So I'm going to close that poll and share the results. Jeff, 100% of these folks have not heard you before.
Oh, good. I get to bore you with the slide then. Okay.
Oh.
Second question, introduce yourself to me if you don't mind. Just tell me how you identify. Do you identify, and Julie, you can pull up the poll.
I did.
Do you identify yourself more as IT, more as marketing, more as an executive? And just whichever one of those most closely aligns. Since this is journey mapping, I think that these are the three main persona types that attend this type of webinar.
We'll give folks a minute to make those. All right, everybody's voted. I'm going to share those results. So 60% say they're technologists and 40% say they're marketers. We didn't have anyone in the executive area.
All right, excellent. And one last way to get to know you, Judy, if you'll pull up the last one, with regards to personas and journey maps, tell me where you guys are with that. Are you not using them at all? Have you recently started using them, or have you been using them for a while, maybe a year or more?
Give folks a minute to answer again. All right. I'm going to close that poll and share the results. And 80% have not used them, and 20% have been using them for over a year. So you've got
interesting split.
A few experts and a whole bunch of newbies.
Yeah, exactly. So for our newbies, I think there'll definitely be a lot to learn. For the ones who've been here, I certainly hope there'll be some tidbits you'll take away. In fact, I'm almost certain there will be, but there might also be some things you can share at the end of this to help everybody else out. So the quick introduction to me, since none of you have heard me before, my name is Jeff Abels. I run a company called C5 Insight. And the bottom line is I'm kind of geeky about customer and employee experience stuff, so I probably spend way more hours working on it than I should. But I do have a little bit of a life outside of it, so you can see my family there. My wife and I recently became in-laws. Both of our daughters that we love to hang out with got married, and so now I've got boys in the family, which is a ton of fun to hang out with. But I'm so new to it, they had to tell me that they are not my stepsons, they're my sons-in-law. I was calling them the wrong thing for a few months. So that was exciting. And we love really good wine, and we love riding our motorcycle together, and we try not to enjoy those two passions at the same time. And we also recently became new parents of a puppy again. So it took us about a year and a half after saying goodbye to our last dog to kind of be ready for another one, and this is Verdi in the bottom of the picture. So we've suddenly realized that a dog takes your freedom away in a big way when your nest empties out, but we love hanging around with our little pup. So that's a little bit about me. Thanks for telling me about you. So our agenda today is this. We're going to talk about personas a little bit first. What are they? How do you create them? Then we're going to spend more of our time talking about journey maps, and then I'll have a little bit of a wrap-up session with you at the end of it. So first of all, why would we even do this, especially for those of you who aren't doing it yet? There's a lot of things on the slide. Feel free to screen grab them. I know, by the way, UG will share this video out to everybody afterwards, so you can come back and look at it again if you want to. But really on the left side of the three big ones, and that is ultimately this idea of transforming your processes, not necessarily changing the experience per se, but actually becoming way more consistent and high quality in the experiences that you're delivering. So we go back to our Sheraton example and kind of, this idea of not only delivering processes better, but making sure that there's less people slipping through the cracks as they go through those experiences. And some key words in there are flexible but consistent. What we find is a lot of organizations might be really good at process because maybe they're really strong operationally or in their accounting or technology departments. But really, processes in those departments tend to be very rigid, very, very consistent, very rigid. Because look, creative accounting, it's not a good term, right? You don't want to be flexible in your accounting processes, but your marketing processes need to be flexible. And the idea behind personas and journey maps helps you to adopt process, but in a way that brings in flexibility that you don't get in other parts of the business typically. And the other two are really innovation. This idea of if you look at this at the right level, you start to come up with new ideas, game changers that make it harder for your competition to keep up with you, that disrupt processes overall and deliver something unexpected and delightful for your customers. And then lastly, personalization. You want to treat different customers differently. And so this is why we want to have personas and know that different things appeal to different people. Different people are willing to invest at different levels to engage with you. So a little bit of a high level on that. If your organization is going to invest in your time or money in facilitation to make this happen, you need to kind of understand why. Now, what we find ultimately is if you're going to do this well, you're going to do 5 things well, really. And this is based on working with a lot of companies, some of whom are doing this well, some of whom aren't. But the whole idea of personas and journey maps is to make your organization one that does a better job of listening to your customers. And listening, when it comes to listening to lots of customers, is actually about data, right? We all know listening at a human level, really important for building one-on-one relationships. But if you want to build relationships at a corporate level, if you want to be a better version of what Sheraton did to me, you need to listen to your customers, to their transactions, to their interactions, to the details of what they're saying to you. You want to go beyond that, though. You also want to understand them. So you want to have the right kind of analytics in place. So Sheraton might have listened to me. Maybe that experience I had is on a system somewhere, but maybe they didn't really understand it. Maybe they didn't have a warehouse somewhere of data where they could bring all of that together to really understand my full experience and respond to that. Then you connect with people. And connecting, a lot of people think, oh, connecting is about good people skills. That's important, but what we have found is it's actually a combination of good process and people skills combined. And the intersection of those is where you get much better results. And finally, they know the results and they continuously work to improve them. So this idea about building personas and journey maps is all about listening, understanding, connecting, and knowing. Real simple way to remember it. When we see organizations doing this well, we say that they're powered by luck. And what we found, having worked with a lot of companies who are doing this well and others who are struggling with it a little bit more, is the organizations that do it really well have this idea of people at the heart of their business, right? So they look at things and say, employees are really important to us, customers are really important to us, suppliers are really important to us. And yes, they want to be profitable, but they tend to kind of say, if we treat these people well, we're going to find our way to being a profitable organization rather than getting it the other way around. Now, what we find, by the way, is people inside of organizations who don't have that level of culture often find that this idea of personas and journey maps and luck is a way you can start to have an impact for the better on your culture as well. So if I gave you one slide to take away today, I would say, and you're going to see this be a recurring theme, this is kind of what you want to embody when you go after building your personas and building your journey maps. And you'll kind of see a little bit more how and why as we get into that. So let's talk about personas a little bit. This dude is Peter Drucker. He's no longer with us, but he's probably one of the most well-known business consultants of all time, certainly of the 20th century. And he built most of his career by asking these 3 questions. This is actually a snapshot of a signed piece of artwork from Peter Drucker that hangs in our conference room. 3 really simple questions that most organizations really struggle to answer. What is our business? Who is our customer? And what does our customer consider to be valuable? That's really what you're trying to answer just in a lot of detail with personas and journey maps. And I guarantee you, once you start asking these questions, it's amazing how difficult it can be to answer these questions that seem like they should almost be self-evident based on where you're working. But these are tools that help us to answer those better. So let's focus on these a little bit. First of all, here's some best practices for a persona overall. When you're answering this question, okay, so who is our customer and what do they consider to be valuable? Some things you can do is you can start with a core persona, right? So if you're just beginning to do this, you might be overwhelmed with, oh my gosh, there's dozens of personas out there we can consider. So instead, maybe starting with more of a very general profile of who we're going after. That might not always work. You might need to drill a little bit more detail into it, but don't try to do everything at once or you're going to spend 6 months doing this when you need to kind of stay busy doing your work too. Second, once you've developed that core persona, now you can start subdividing that into kind of shorter, more detailed personas. In the end, some organizations end up with just 1 or 2 personas. It's beautiful when you can be that simple. Most organizations don't have that luxury. Some are at the other end of the spectrum. They can literally have hundreds of personas that they're dealing with overall. So know yourself, know where you're going and what you're likely to end up with. Know that different personas may engage at different stages of the journey, particularly if you're a business-to-business organization. You might say, hey, on the front end of this, I'm dealing with a junior analyst who's been delegated the task of investigating the service we sell. But then 3 stages in, I might be dealing with the CFO. So again, different personas may be involved throughout a single journey. And remember, your personas do not necessarily need to be mutually exclusive. So you might define a persona of, I don't know, a first-time buyer, and you might define a persona of a CFO. Well, that might be one and the same person sometimes. That's okay. That's acceptable. The idea of personas is not to be exclusive. It's to give you a framework you can use to develop better experiences. So the first thing you want to do as you think about defining your personas is the big split. Is this a buyer persona or is this a customer persona? And I put the slide in here because as we've facilitated a lot of these things, we find that sometimes these are very driven by sales, and sales has a lot of pressure on them to say, I want to add new customers to what we're doing, which is fine. But also you sometimes forget that it costs 7 to 10 times less to keep and expand an existing relationship than it does to win a new relationship. So Sheraton, small changes for an existing customer like me might keep me longer. And by the way, I still work with Sheraton. No, I mean, heck, I've gotten a lot of mileage out of them with this example. But the general idea is, they probably are focusing more on trying to win new people rather than looking at this saying, wow, if we kept Jeff, then that would have been a lot lower cost of an investment than getting a new person. So this is the first and most important split to think about. Are you really talking about customers? Or are you talking about a brand new prospect that's a buyer? Either one is okay. Eventually, you certainly want to cover both. Little link up there, that's a blog talking about these different persona types, something you might want to look up. Then you can dig into a lot more detailed segmentation once you've done that. So you may want to look at it and say, are you doing any kind of segmentation at all today? That might be a great starting point for your customer personas. And then what circumstances make more sense to you? So ideally, you kind of develop a list of personas, and you might prioritize them because it's hard to build all of them out at once. On the left side there's a whole lot of different ways you can develop personas. And it's going to vary broadly depending on what kind of business you're in. Are you dealing with consumers? Are you dealing with businesses? Are you dealing with both? Are you dealing with a complex buying cycle? Are you dealing with a more transactional buying cycle? All of those things can come into place as you look at this stuff. So we could spend a whole day just talking about this slide. I'm going to rapidly go through these 3 slides. This is kind of a good way to kind of start to define your personas as an internal brainstorming exercise. So what we typically do, in fact, these come straight out of our facilitation deck, is start to say, well, what is your business? Or if you've got a lot of businesses, which is the business that we're going to focus on building personas out for now? And there's voting exercises you can use for this, where you can kind of go, okay, we're in these 8 different businesses. Now as a team, let's prioritize and decide which business goes first. What's our most important persona? And there might be a lot of back and forth around, well, really, some of the same personas are across all these businesses. Great, but more focus is better than less focus at this point. So choose one business to focus on. Maybe it's one that a lot of the others share customers with, fine, but choose your one before you dive in any deeper. Then ask yourselves as a team, so who are the customers that our business serves? And I'm not asking about personas per se yet. I'm asking more about very high level personas. I'll give you an example on the next slide. From this, you'd build out your personas. So once we've asked these 2 questions, then we use a process where we say, okay, well, let's put a sticky on the wall for each of those groups of customers that we serve, and let's start brainstorming all the personas that are engaged throughout the process within those groups. So it would look like this. Let's say that we're working with a event management organization, and they say, well, we've got 2 primary customer types. We have people who sponsor events, and we have people who attend events. And by the way, both of these are revenue centers for us. So that's what I mean by customer groups, not personas per se, but what are our different revenue sources? So these guys say, okay, sponsors are one, attendees are another. And then we go, okay, team, let's now start to think about who are the personas under each one of those. And as a few examples, under sponsors, you might say, well, we've got really large sponsors. Those are really important to us, so let's pull them out. And maybe we'll also look at, we've got repeat sponsors. We want to make sure we don't forget to invite people back to the event year after year. There might be a much longer list. Those are a couple of examples. On the attendee side, they might say, we're actually a membership organization. Some of our attendees are members of our organization. And by the way, some of our attendees are first-time attendees to the event. And we want to make sure that they have a great experience here, so they're going to come back next year. And again, as you look at these things, you can see that Maybe there's some overlap across these personas. That's okay. Just a very high level set of examples. And you can kind of see how you can use stickies to kind of facilitate this brainstorming exercise. This exercise, by the way, is one of a group of them that we call luckstorming. The idea behind this is meetings are actually really difficult sometimes to facilitate well. They tend to be very unproductive. So luckstorming is this idea of saying, how do we give everybody a voice in the meeting so it's not dominated by the extrovert or dominated by the business leader who everyone else wants to defer to, but those frontline people, some of whom have the best ideas, are given an equal voice. Then how do we actually understand? So how do we gather the input, but we understand? By putting those stickies on the wall, people are seeing things and discussing things and agreeing to things as they go along. You make decisions and you can even prioritize things. So voting exercises can help with some of this stuff. And then you can know what the results are. It's kind of self-documenting, so it's easy to put all of that together. The idea behind doing this with your personas and journey maps, and you'll see more of this in a briefer format, is these are way more efficient and iterative and just more interesting meetings to be a part of. We just facilitated one of these with a gigantic bank that you would have heard of. And frankly, I know they've got all sorts of cool things that they do all the time in there, so we didn't think this would be that special. At the end of this meeting, people pulled us aside and said, thank you. It was so much more engaging and I could think more clearly and contribute because this was more than just sitting around a table and talking. So it's important as you think about this, you're trying to create innovation. And if you just sit in a conference room around a table and start scratching your heads together, trying to come up with stuff, it's going to move a lot more slowly and be a lot more ineffective if you don't have a good facilitation methodology. So some other ideas for listening, by the way, just getting into a room and defining personas and journey maps is a start. But also, the closer you can get to what's actually going on in these journeys, the more likely you're going to learn something. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I'm going to share one of my very favorite ones with you guys, and that's the one in the upper left corner there, a ride-along. So a ride-along, it actually comes from the motorcycle industry, and back in the day, Harley-Davidson's brand was really suffering, and they sat around their corporate room with all the executives and said, what do we do to turn this around? And someone said, why are we all sitting here in our pinstripe suits talking about bikers? Let's go get on our bikes and ride with some bikers and see what they say. And it absolutely transformed their organization by doing this. And actually going back and doing some of this again now is the way people engage with motorcycles is actually changing. So one thing I really encourage you guys to do, you can't do enough of it. It is a time commitment. We do it with our clients all the time, and we advise them to do it, is go on ride-alongs. Go live a day in the shoes of the person that you're creating this map for, whether it's a coworker who's engaging with the customer or the customer themselves. Just go experience what it is that they're experiencing. By taking those things together, one of the first things you can do is you define your personas. You've decided who your persona is, but now how do I really get to know them? This is a great exercise, and you can copy this. I'll actually give you an opportunity to download this at the end of this presentation. But this is an empathy map, and there's lots of different people who've done different versions of this empathy map. In a minute, you'll see our methodology for having come up with this. But the point of an empathy map is to say, as you see there on the left, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I feel your pain. The idea with empathy in general is I want to feel what this person is feeling in such a real way that I want to solve the problem almost as much as they want to solve the problem. I really want to feel their pain, right? As somebody who's working at Sheraton, hope no one from Sheraton's listening today, ideally it's like, oh my gosh, I feel the pain of that midnight experience and going to that smelly hotel room and then getting a thank you card. Like I want to solve that problem. So you kind of go through this exercise from left working towards right, and you gradually fill out these different things to say, what is going on in the mind of the head of this person? And you can kind of see it consummates over on the far right there with the thoughts, feelings, and even ideally something this person would say. And so here's a quick fill in the blank way of doing this. You can get much more expressive, but this is a quick formula. I am blank, so blank is important to me, right? So I am a frequent business traveler, so fast and seamless service and a safe and comfortable room is really important to me. However you might want to fill that one in. But something you can really fill in that gets to the heart and the gut of what's going on with this person, the core issue that you want to solve with a journey map. So as you kind of think about that and start to develop empathy maps, think about it this way. Your persona profile is really driven on four things. It's driven on what data about this person can we capture, how we analyze that data, what are they experiencing now, and how can we create better experiences? And how, A, will we measure the results, but how will that customer measure the results? How will they feel the difference? Because we want to get inside their head. We don't want to just go, did I get an ROI from this? Well, that's fine, but did the customer really feel the benefit of it? And you can see on the left-hand side, we're a little more focused on the empathy map. On the right-hand side, we're a little more focused on the journey map. And if you think about those four headers a little bit differently, data is really just about listening to people and capturing data. Analysis is about more deeply understanding them. As Stephen Covey says, don't just listen with the intent to respond, but listen with the intent to truly understand. Experiences are how are we connecting, and measurement is how are we knowing our results so we can continuously improve. If you tuned out a few minutes ago, listen, understand, connect, know. That's the luck principle again. Everything we do is about this is the foundation of all human relationships. If we're about better customer and employee engagement, how do we apply this model to everything we do? Now, at the top of that is persona profile. A persona profile kind of starts to take that empathy map and begins to help you imagine what the journey map might look like a little bit. So you can see this is a form we've come up with. We tend to customize it for every client we engage with, but it's a good starting point form for what kind of data points might we capture. The numbers there just kind of outline the sequence in which you might fill these in, and then I've given you a little more perspective on these no things that you want to fill out around metrics, your metrics and the customer's metrics, so you can make sure you understand what's going on in the mind of everybody. Another worksheet I'll give you an opportunity to download at the end of the session. Now, one other thing to keep in mind, and this is particularly true if you're doing buyer personas, not so much customer personas, but buyer personas, it can be really helpful to have negative personas. So those are basically the people who are going to be disqualified from working for you. So knowing who you don't want to work with can sometimes help you better define who you do want to work with. So this is a worksheet for kind of starting to list out, here might be some negative personas that really aren't engaging for us. Negative does not mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means, hey, relative to our business model, these are people that we're not going to engage with. So let's not bend over backwards trying to serve these folks. Frankly, someone like at a Sheraton, and forgive me if this describes you, but they might look at it and go, this is a person who travels hardly ever at all, and they're hardly ever going to give us any repeat business. And so, if we don't serve them perfectly well, we're really not going to worry about them quite as much as our other really valuable, highly engaged customer. So remember this as I go through all this. I've just talked about personas. I'm going to shift to talking about journey maps here for the rest of the session. But powered by luck is what this is all about. So if I go back to anything, I would say keep returning to that as you think about however you're changing this process. How are we doing those four things better? How are we creating a business that better listens to, understands, connect with, and knows the results that we're generating for our customers and for our employees, by the way? But also go into it with the idea of adapt, don't adopt. And what I mean by that is every organization is a little bit different. We've never done two of these facilitation sessions and they've been exactly the same because you're in different industries, you're working with different customers, you've got different cultural standards, all those things. So take this as a framework, but don't take it as a prescription. Take it as something as a starting point that you can tweak and make your own. So let's talk a little bit about journey maps now. So we've got our personas, and ideally before you do a journey map, you have at least one persona. Even if it's an overall persona, you have this empathy map giving you a gut level of who is this person that I'm talking through throughout the life cycle of this engagement. So now you can start to think about this at a bunch of different levels. So you've got the overall full customer journey, right? From before they do business with us all the way to the end of their life cycle with us, hopefully very far into the future. But within that customer journey, you've probably got a lot of different strategic journeys, right? You might have a buying journey, returning an item journey, whatever it is, but more high-level strategic journeys. Within those strategic journeys, you might have more tactical journeys. A tactical journey is something like, hey, they landed on a specific landing page. What are the exact steps that are going to happen from here? They responded to this email. What are the exact steps that are going to happen from here? Tactical journeys are really the things, if you're using a campaign automation type of tool, tactical journey is the level you ultimately need to get to have what you need to fill into those journey maps that are there. Strategic journeys are actually where you get a lot of your innovation. That's where you get a lot of higher level ideas where you're not very far inside the box, you're not inside of a tight box, and you can start to dream about things that maybe the technology doesn't make available for you, but that you want to do to transform the journey. Now, whatever level of journey you're building out, you then need to start thinking about what is the outline for my journey map. And there are really 4 things you want to do as you map out that journey map. For every phase of that journey you're mapping out, you want the goals of that phase, your goals and the customer's goals. You want the actions that are being taken in that phase. You want to understand and even rate the experiences happening in that phase. And you want to know what channels you're delivering during that phase. Now remember, that's phase by phase. So if I'm defining a journey map, I might take those 4 things and I might talk about those 4 things 3, 4, 5 times over the course of that journey map, because it's every phase I want to be thinking about that. So we've talked about personas and empathy maps and that kind of thing. With regard to the customer journey, what we've talked about so far are general empathy maps and personas. So that just basically means, hey, overall, here's the customer. But once I start looking at a specific journey, whether that be a journey stage, or a journey phase, I might then also want to look at a contextual empathy map and persona profile. So again, if I kind of think of something like, well, actually here, I'll give you an exact example in the next slide. We actually facilitated this in our Dynamics Communities Academy session about a year ago, and we used Dynamics Communities as our example client, right? So everyone in the room, even though they came from a lot of different customers, said, okay, let's pretend we're Dynamic Communities and we're running this event right now. And what does our contextual persona profile look like? So we said, okay, look, we want to bring in customer experience directors to this event, not just CRM administrators, but people who are at a more strategic level. And we think our typical customer experience director is at this kind of company, and they deal with this kind of customers, and they're probably already a member of Dynamics Communities, but maybe this person has never come before, but their CRM administrator has come before. And so this customer experience director, relative to this particular event, is saying at the bottom there, hey, I need a vision and strategies for using technology to deliver better customer experiences. Wow, okay, that gives us a totally different perspective of what we want to deliver when that person shows up for the session. So that's ultimately what a contextual persona might look like that helps you build a better journey map. And once you start building your journey map, you really want to do 2 things. You want to start by understanding the current state. I think it was Albert Einstein that said, if someone gave me a problem to solve, I'd spend 95% of my time understanding the problem, and I'd spend 5% of my time coming up with the answer. That's what understanding the current state really means. Take as much time as you need to really map out what is the current journey, what's really going on, so you can understand all the implications of making changes to that journey before you start making the changes. Then you start to envision the future state. So, you know, our illustration here is, oh my gosh, there's this rickety, crazy bridge. It's dangerous to cross and scary, and we want to go to this beautiful covered bridge. It's this great experience for people to engage with. So let's talk about understanding the current state. Again, I'm going to give you an exercise that you can do with your own group, right? Take the slide exactly as it is. But here's some things we typically do. We would say, look, let's not get too in the box yet. So we typically say we're going to put a sticky on the wall, 3 stickies actually. One sticky will say beginning, the next one will say middle, and the next one will say end. And we'll give the team the instructions you see on the right side of the screen there, and basically say, for whatever persona and whatever journey we've defined, list out these things. Start writing them on stickies and putting them under beginning, middle, and end. Now we do it this way because we don't want to bias people with coming up with the stages up front and all of that kind of stuff. We want to kind of create open, innovative thinking to start with. So we're as far out of the box as we can to start with. We gradually get deeper and deeper into the box. So people start dreaming and putting things up there. Remember, this is current stage journey. So we're not thinking about the future. We're thinking about how does it work now. And ideally, you're seeing good things, but you're also seeing bad things. And you're not necessarily seeing things that always consistently happen. You might see things that sometimes happen. So if I'm at Sheraton doing this, I might go, you know, sometimes people show up and there's no room at the inn, right? We've overbooked for that night. Now, of course, that doesn't happen every time, but part of this is a journey map is not a process. It's not these specific things happen every time. It's, hey, some of these things might happen depending on the circumstances, and I want to get all of those down because I want to understand and solve some of those problems.
Is anybody in here?
And the next thing to think about is, okay, now you've developed those 3 stages. Now we typically put a bunch of stickies across the wall and say, okay, let's take all those things you brainstormed and let's kind of start reorganizing them together. Because, you know, somebody might have put something in the beginning that someone else thinks happens in the middle. You might look at the beginning and say that's really 2 different things. So we start to kind of go, let's reorganize all those ideas you came up with into stages, put them under blank stickies, name the stickies when you're done with it to have your stages. So, you know, it might look kind of like this. Hey, we've got 5 journeys or 5 stages or whatever it is. Now, it can be really tempting at this point to go, oh, we want to break it down into more detail and have more stages. What I can tell you is, in this case, less is almost always more. So it can look really important and sophisticated to have lots of stages and lots of stickies all over the place. The more you complicate this, the more you make it difficult for you to actually do anything with it. Our experience is start with less to begin with. Over time, you will get more sophisticated, but cringe because you're keeping it too simple. Don't cringe because you're making it too complex. If you're cringing because you think maybe this is too complex, my experience is it's definitely too complex. Scale it back some and try to kind of get almost uncomfortable with how simple it is. Then once you have your stages, you go through each stage and you start to go through these 5 exercises that I'll talk through. That sheet on the bottom, I'll show you one that's completed here in a minute. But that sheet on the bottom is a journey mapping template. So that's a gigantic piece of blotter paper that everybody can put stickies on. It fills up a whole conference room type of wall. So as you go through and you have your stages, you're going to go, okay, stage 1, let's talk about what our goals are. And you talk about what's the goal of the business at this stage, what's the goal of the customer at this stage. So you want to think through what does the customer really want and what do you really want. It's tempting to kind of keep restating the same goal. That doesn't work. What you want to say is if it's a stage, there's something specific that's happening at that stage for a reason. If you cannot articulate a goal for a stage that's different than the goal for every other stage, you need to ask yourself if it's really a stage or not. Next, you want to think about, so what needs does the customer have? What are they thinking? What are they feeling as they go through it? Remember your current state. So some of this is probably going to be some negative feelings, some potentially negative experiences, and also some potentially positive experiences. Maybe you've got an awesome customer service representative that's doing great things at this stage, but it's only happening in isolation because you haven't shared the learning. So that's part of what you want to pull out and go, how can we make that happen for everybody every single time? Then you can talk about the experience at this stage. What's happening in the best case? What's happening in the worst case? What's happening very consistently every time? And really what you'd ideally like to do is rate these experiences. Are they really positive? Are they kind of positive? Are they neutral, negative, or extremely negative? I'll come back to that in just a few minutes. And then you want to talk about, so what's influencing this experience? What are all the people and processes and technologies and channels and all of those things that are influencing what's happening in this experience? Because those are the things we're going to have to engage with to change the experience. And finally, you're going to, for each stage, come up with your improvements. So what do we envision doing better as a result of updating this journey? Remember, we're still at current stage. You're just kind of high-level dreaming at this point. You'll plot them out into a future state journey map as a future step. And remember, we've only done this for one stage. So the next thing you do is move on to the next stage and the next until you finish creating that journey mapping framework. And if you look at this and think about it just a little bit differently, there's the 5 different things we want to do at each stage of the journey. Those 5 things can go by 5 different names that you're now pretty familiar with, and you can actually see how those fit into the journey mapping template that we use. So when you're done, you're going to have a journey map that looks something like this. I cut off the far left, by the way, here. The far left is where you put up the persona empathy map and persona profile for the persona, and then the rest of this gets filled out this way. So this is one we actually did, the same one I referred to earlier, where we came up with 4 stages for getting the customer experience director to attend and engage with a Dynamics Communities Summit event each year, and a bunch of different ideas. And for folks who aren't necessarily deeply engaged with this, it was surprising how many ideas they came up with that would actually improve the experience. So if you're actually engaged in your business, you're going to come up with even more and better ideas for doing this. Now, I'm not going to go through this in a lot of detail, in fact, not much detail at all, because really envisioning the future state is a lot like the current state. You're just kind of repeating the exercise now, but you're starting to actually put things on here saying, how do we think we can create something better in the future? What does the map look like as we do this? One thing to remember as you do this, you might have heard this analogy before, But remember, sometimes you're paving the cow paths and sometimes you're building super highways. What that means is sometimes you're doing tactical things just to say, let's take what's already happening, let's just tighten it up and do a little bit better, a little more consistency, a little bit better quality. Everything we do does not have to be this radical, expensive, risky innovation. But sometimes you are building a super highway. Sometimes you're creating a whole new way of getting stuff done. And what I do know from experience is you can't pave potholes and one day wake up and find out you've built a super highway. Either you're paving potholes to keep the road working, or you're building a separate superhighway, but you're not doing both at once. So now as you come up with all those ideas, where do you start to kind of implement those? How do you rate them? There's a lot of ways to do it. If you look actually back at that template I gave you at the very bottom, where I kind of said, okay, come up with your ideas for improvement, you actually start to categorize your improvements. So you say, hey, is this really difficult, or is it not very difficult at all? Now you can change the word difficult with complex or expensive, whatever you want to do. And then how impactful is this? Will it be high impact or will it be low impact? So the idea is if you come up with ideas that are very impactful and simple and low cost, that's your magic quadrant. Absolutely go implement those first. Your other quadrants probably are really difficult and low impact. You'll never do those at all. Your other two, you may come back to later. Now, one thing I've seen work really well here is taking those other two and starting to say, hey, can we come up with smaller, simple steps towards these ideas so that some of these things can actually fall into that magic quadrant for us? So then you start breaking those ideas down into sub-ideas and coming with other things that you can do that are high impact and low cost as well. There's another whole way to look at this, by the way. When you look at the experience rating, I'm going to go back a few slides just to show you this. Okay, so as you put experiences out here, you can see people rated these as high, medium, low types of experiences. You can actually look at the ones and say, you know, do we want to improve ones that are already good? Do we want to improve ones that are negative? Human intuition is, oh, let's take negative experiences and make them positive. What we've actually found is if you can take a slightly positive experience and knock it out of the park, that can actually have a better impact on overall customer perception than taking a somewhat negative experience and making it a somewhat positive experience. So sometimes the magic is in finding a few wow moments rather than just trying to get everything to just being slightly positive. And sorry, I got to catch up on my slides. Okay, so wrap up, just a couple of thoughts to take away with you and then some tools that you can take home with you afterwards. So first of all, remembering that this whole idea, as we're getting more and more engaged in the digital world, we start to think, oh, technology is going to solve problems for us. Don't get me wrong, I love technology. I go to events to learn more about technology all the time. But I'll tell you, I've gone to so many of these events over so many years and seen people talking about cool things we can do with technology that have not figured out the fundamentals of people engagement. Cool technology is never just going to automatically solve that. These kinds of exercises, these kinds of things that help us focus on what are we really delivering to the customer, how are we making it easy for our team to deliver those experiences, those are the things that change things. I can tell you one of the best adopting CRM clients I've ever worked with is a company up in Chicago who has a homegrown CRM built on top of Lotus Notes. If you've never heard of Lotus Notes, go ask your parents what it is. Nobody should be using Lotus Notes anymore, but this was a recent experience. It was a horrible CRM solution relative to what you guys can do with Dynamics 365, and yet they're getting a ton of value out of it because they focused on these basic things. I'm not trying to tell you to go switch to Lotus Notes. What I'm telling you is you've got great technology right now. Spend a little less time worrying about how to trick out the technology. Spend a little more time worrying about how to deliver great customer experiences and simple ways for your team to use it. And you're going to get a lot more mileage than you are by just focusing on technology. Some quick takeaways for you. If you like the idea of the luck principle, the book is available out there on Amazon.com. If you're coming to Focus next week, I'm actually going to bring a few copies with me. First come, first serve. Glad to hand those out for free if you come to one of my sessions. If you like the worksheets, just email me. My email address is right there. I'll be glad to email you a copy of all the worksheets I showed you today. I'll also send you an ebook for luck-based benchmarking, so a way to kind of rate your CRM based on how well is it living up to those 4 characteristics that we talked about. And of course, this is what we do as our core business. So we'd love to work with you. I know that that may or may not make sense for some of you guys, but I'd certainly love to hear from you if you're looking for someone who can help facilitate this kind of work or help you implement or improve your CRM. Thanks for listening, everybody. Julie, I don't know if we've got a few minutes for questions or not.
We do have a few minutes, but I don't have any questions in the queue, so I want to give folks just a minute to enter them and remind you all that because you registered for the event, you'll get an email link in the next day or so to both this PowerPoint presentation and a recording. So, Jeff, if you could send me that, it would be great.
Absolutely.
All right. That sounds wonderful. And I have a couple of comments that just say wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. So with that, I'm going to close the webinar and wish you all a good early weekend. Goodbye, everyone.
Have a good day. Thank you, Julie.